In the wake of Pope Francis's sudden death, Rome teeters on the edge of chaos as the secretive conclave gathers to choose his successor. Sarah Harper, a relentless American journalist, uncovers a chilling prophecy foretelling the rise of Peter the Roman, a pope destined to lead the church into its final days. As earthquakes rattle the city and whispers of a hidden relic grow, Sarah's pursuit of the truth draws her into a web of ancient rituals and a shadowy order within the Vatican. Each plume of smoke from the Sistine Chapel heightens the tension. Will the next pope save Rome or herald its destruction? With danger closing in and omens darkening the skies, Sarah must unravel the prophecy's secrets before time runs out. Dive into a gripping tale of faith, betrayal, and apocalyptic stakes that will keep you on edge until the final blessing. The bells of St. Peter's Basilica tolled, their mournful echoes rolling over Vatican City like a tide. Each clang was heavy, deliberate, as if the ancient bronze mourned the loss of a soul too vast for the world to hold. Pope Francis, the shepherd of 1 billion Catholics, was dead. A stroke had claimed him on April 21, 2025, silencing his gentle voice and leaving the church adrift. In St. Peter's Square, thousands stood frozen, their faces etched with grief and uncertainty. The usual hum of tourists and pilgrims was gone, replaced by a stillness so profound it seemed the city itself held its breath. Sarah Harper stepped off the bus at the edge of the square, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her notebook clutched tightly in her hand. A 28-year-old journalist from Chicago, she'd built a modest career chasing stories that others dismissed as fringe. But this was different. The rumors had reached her weeks ago, whispered in online forums and cryptic emails. An ancient prophecy about the last pope, a figure destined to lead the church into its final days. When news of Francis's death broke, Sarah booked the first flight to Rome, driven by a gut feeling that the story of her life was waiting here. She wove through the crowd, her eyes scanning the sea of mourners. Nuns clutched rosaries, their lips moving in silent prayer. Families stood huddled, some weeping, others staring at the basilica's facade as if it might offer answers. Above, the sky was a bruised gray, clouds swirling over the dome like a warning. Sarah's gaze lingered on the chimney atop the Sistine Chapel, where soon the world would watch for smoke, black for indecision, white for a new pope. But it was the prophecy that gnawed at her. She'd read the words late at night, her laptop screen casting shadows. Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep in many tribulations, and the city of 7 hills will be destroyed. A shiver ran through her as she scribbled in her notebook. April 21st, 2025. Pope Francis dead. Prophecy real. The Catholic Church stood at a crossroads, its next leader to be chosen in a ritual older than most nations. But what if the whispers were true? What if the next pope was the one foretold, the one to herald the end? Sarah glanced at the faces around her, strangers united in grief, unaware of the shadow looming over Rome. She tightened her grip on her pen. Whatever came next, she'd be there to witness it. Sarah's boots echoed on the cobblestones as she slipped away from St. Peter's Square, the mourners' whispers fading behind her. The air was thick with the scent of rain and incense, and Rome felt alive with secrets. She'd heard of a small library near the Vatican, a place where scholars and eccentrics traded tales the church preferred to keep buried. If the prophecy of the last pope was real, that's where she'd find answers. Her phone buzzed with news alerts. Tributes to Pope Francis poured in from world leaders, but no mention of what came next. The conclave, the smoke, the prophecy. The library was tucked in a narrow alley, its wooden door unmarked save for a faded carving of a dove. Inside, the air was heavy with the musty scent of old books. Shelves towered to the ceiling, crammed with leather-bound tomes and scrolls that looked older than the city itself. Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dim light as a figure emerged from the shadows. An elderly man, stooped and wiry, with glasses perched on a hawkish nose. His name, he said, was Father Lorenzo, the librarian. His voice was soft, but carried the weight of someone who'd spent decades guarding forbidden knowledge. "You're here about the prophecy," he said before Sarah could speak. His eyes gleamed with a mix of caution and curiosity. "The one they call Malachi's." Sarah's pulse quickened. The prophecy of Malachi. She'd skimmed references online, but the details were murky, shrouded in legend. "Tell me," she said, leaning closer. "What is it?" Father Lorenzo hesitated, then pulled a thin, cracked volume from a locked drawer. Its pages were brittle, the Latin text faded but legible. "In the 12th century," he began, "an Irish bishop named Malachi claimed visions of every pope from his time to the end of the Church. 112 pontiffs, each described in cryptic phrases. The last he called Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman." His finger traced the final line. "During the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, Peter the Roman will reign, pasturing his flock amid many tribulations. Then the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end." Sarah's throat tightened. Rome, the city of 7 hills. The words felt like a curse. "You think it's real?" she asked. Lorenzo's gaze darkened. "The Church calls it a forgery, a medieval hoax, but there are those within these walls who believe. For centuries, popes have avoided the name Peter, fearing its weight. And now, with Francis gone—" He trailed off, glancing at the window as if expecting the sky to crack open. Sarah's mind raced. She knew Pope Francis had been linked to the prophecy. Some claimed he was the 112th pope, others the one before. But the librarian's next words chilled her. "There's more," he said, lowering his voice. "A legend, whispered among the Vatican's oldest guards. They say Malachi's vision came with a warning. When Peter the Roman rises, a shadow will fall over Rome. Earthquakes, fire, betrayal. Some believe the Church itself hides a relic, a key to averting the end, locked away since Malachi's time." "A relic?" Sarah pressed, her journalist's instinct kicking in. "What kind?" Lorenzo shook his head. "No one knows. Or those who do, don't speak. But I've seen cardinals tremble at the prophecy's mention. It's no mere story, Miss Harper. It's a secret they've killed to protect." A creak from the library's door made them both freeze. Footsteps echoed in the alley outside, deliberate and slow. Lorenzo snapped the book shut, his eyes wide with urgency. "Go," he hissed. "Find the truth, but trust no one. Not in Rome. Not now." Sarah slipped out the back, her heart pounding as she clutched her notebook. The prophecy's words burned in her mind. The city of 7 hills will be destroyed. She didn't know if she believed in visions or relics, but Father Lorenzo's fear was real. And as she glanced back at the library, a shadow moved in the doorway. A figure in black, watching her. Rome was no longer just a city. It was a puzzle, a trap, a countdown. And Sarah was determined to unravel it before the smoke rose. The Sistine Chapel's doors groaned shut, their ancient hinges sealing the fate of the Catholic Church. Inside, 120 cardinals stood beneath Michelangelo's frescoes, the Last Judgment looming over them like a silent warning. The air was thick with incense and anticipation, the weight of centuries pressing down. Outside, the world waited, eyes fixed on a narrow chimney atop the chapel. Black smoke for indecision, white for a new pope. But within these walls, the conclave of April 2025 was no mere election. It was a battle for the soul of Rome, shadowed by a prophecy few dared name. The ritual began as it had for nearly a millennium. The cardinals, robed in scarlet, swore oaths of secrecy, their voices echoing in the candlelit chamber. The master of papal ceremonies, a stern figure with eyes like flint, intoned the ancient command, "Extra omnes, everyone out." Guards swept the chapel for spies, their footsteps sharp against the marble floor. Hidden microphones, planted by curious outsiders, were crushed underfoot. The doors were locked, the keys entrusted to a silent Swiss guard. No one would enter or leave until a pope was chosen. Sarah watched from a rooftop cafe overlooking Vatican City, her binoculars trained on the chimney. The square below buzzed with journalists, pilgrims, and doomsayers waving signs about the last pope. She'd barely slept since her encounter with Father Lorenzo, the prophecy's words looping in her mind. Peter the Roman. The city of 7 hills will be destroyed. Her notebook was already filled with questions. Who were the cardinals choosing? And did they know the stakes? Inside the chapel, the first ballots were cast. Each cardinal wrote a name on a slip of paper, folding it twice before placing it in a silver urn. The ballots were counted, then threaded onto a needle and burned in a small stove, its pipe leading to the chimney. Chemicals, black for failure, white for success, were added to the fire, a practice perfected over centuries. As the first plumes of black smoke curled into the gray Roman sky, a collective sigh rippled through St. Peter's Square. No pope yet. But within the conclave, tensions simmered. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's shrewd Secretary of State, commanded respect but faced whispers of ambition. Cardinal Peter Erdo, the Hungarian traditionalist, rallied conservatives, his stern gaze silencing doubters. Others, like the charismatic Luis Antonio Tagle from the Philippines, pushed for reform, their voices clashing in hushed debates. Yet a darker current ran beneath the arguments. Some cardinals, those who'd read the forbidden texts in the Vatican's secret archives, feared the prophecy of Malachi. What if the next pope was the one foretold? What if their choice doomed Rome? An older cardinal, his hands trembling, spoke of a legend during a late-night session. "They say the prophecy is tied to a relic," he whispered, "a fragment of Peter's cross hidden beneath the basilica. It's said to hold the power to avert the end, or hasten it." His words were met with uneasy silence. Some dismissed it as superstition, but others exchanged glances, their thoughts turning to the name no pope had dared take: Peter. Outside, Sarah's phone buzzed with a tip from an anonymous source. The cardinals are divided. Some want to bury the prophecy, others to face it. She scribbled the words, her mind racing. The black smoke meant delay, but it also meant something was wrong. She thought of Father Lorenzo's warning, trust no one, and the shadow in the library doorway. Someone was watching her, and they didn't want her digging deeper. As night fell, the Sistine Chapel glowed faintly, its secrets locked within. The cardinals prepared for another vote, their faces etched with exhaustion and doubt. Above them, the frescoed Christ seemed to judge their every choice. And in the streets of Rome, a faint tremor shook the ground, too subtle for most to notice. Sarah felt it, her coffee cup rattling on the table. She stared at the chimney, willing the smoke to rise again. Whatever came next, she knew one thing. The conclave wasn't just choosing a pope, it was tempting fate. Sarah hunched over a rickety table in a dimly lit Roman cafe, the hum of espresso machines masking her racing thoughts. The second day of the conclave had ended with more black smoke, and the world's patience was fraying. Her phone buzzed with headlines. No pope yet. Vatican in crisis. But Sarah's focus was elsewhere. A cryptic message had arrived that morning, slipped under her hotel door, a single sheet of paper listing 5 names: Pietro Parolin, Peter Erdo, Luis Antonio Tagle, Matteo Zuppi, Raymond Burke. The front-runners for the papacy. Scrawled at the bottom was a warning. One of them knows the truth. Inside the Sistine Chapel, the cardinals were locked in their sacred dance, but these 5 men stood at its heart. Sarah had spent the morning digging into their lives, piecing together their stories from news archives and whispered rumors. Each was a titan in the church, yet each carried shadows that made her question. Could one of them be Petrus Romanus, the pope destined to usher in Rome's end? Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's Secretary of State, was the diplomat's diplomat, polished, calculating with a smile that never reached his eyes. At 70, he'd navigated the church through scandals and global unrest, earning allies and enemies in equal measure. But whispers followed him. Some said he'd brokered secret deals with powers the church shouldn't touch. Could his ambition blind him to the prophecy's weight? Cardinal Peter Erdo, the Hungarian, was a fortress of tradition. His name alone, Peter, sent chills through those who knew the prophecy. At 72, his stern sermons championed orthodoxy, but his critics called him rigid, a man who'd rather see the church burn than bend. Sarah's notes circled his name twice. Was it coincidence or fate? Luis Antonio Tagle, the 67-year-old from the Philippines, was the people's cardinal. His infectious warmth and calls for a humbler church made him a favorite among reformers. Yet Sarah found stories of a darker side, moments of ruthless pragmatism that clashed with his sunny image. Did his charisma hide a deeper purpose? Matteo Zuppi, the Italian, was younger at 69, a progressive who walked Bologna's streets to serve the poor. His gentle demeanor masked a fierce intellect, but some in the Vatican saw him as too soft, too willing to challenge tradition. Sarah wondered, could his compassion make him a target for those guarding the prophecy's secrets? Then there was Raymond Burke, the American, a 76-year-old firebrand whose ultra-conservative views divided the faithful. His outspoken critiques of Pope Francis had earned him a cult following and a reputation for defiance. If anyone would confront the prophecy head-on, it was Burke. But would he wield it as a weapon? Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by a text from an unknown number. Check the archives. Dossier 17B. Her heart skipped. The Vatican archives were a labyrinth, off-limits to outsiders, but she'd made a contact, a junior priest who owed her a favor. By dusk, she was in a dusty basement, the priest nervously handing her a faded folder labeled 17B. Inside was a bombshell, a report, dated decades ago, detailing a cardinal's obsession with the prophecy of Malachi. The name was redacted, but clues pointed to one of the 5 frontrunners. Handwritten notes mentioned a key to Peter's cross, the relic Father Lorenzo had hinted at, a relic tied to the prophecy's endgame. The dossier suggested this cardinal had once tried to access a hidden vault beneath St. Peter's Basilica, only to be stopped by the Vatican's inner circle. Why? What did he know? Sarah's mind raced as she cross-referenced the dossier with her notes. The cardinal's age, his postings, his allies, it narrowed the field, but not enough. One of these men, Parolin, Erdo, Tagle, Zuppi, or Burke, was hiding a truth that could shake the church to its core. As she slipped the dossier into her bag, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A shadow darted past the archive's entrance, too quick to identify. Her pulse pounded. Someone was following her, and they knew she was close. Outside, the Roman night was alive with whispers of the conclave, the prophecy, and a city teetering on the edge. Sarah gripped her bag tighter, the dossier burning a hole in her thoughts. One of the 5 was more than a candidate. He was a key to the end, or its architect. The Roman sky was heavy with clouds, as if heaven itself grew impatient. On the 4th day of the conclave, black smoke curled once more from the Sistine Chapel's chimney, a dark serpent twisting against the gray dawn. St. Peter's Square erupted in murmurs, disappointment, frustration, and something darker, fear. The cardinals had failed again to choose a pope, and the world was tiring of the wait. News anchors speculated about rifts within the Vatican, while doomsayers in the streets waved signs proclaiming the end. Sarah Harper, perched on a balcony overlooking the square, felt the city's pulse quicken. Rome was a powder keg, and the prophecy was its spark. Inside the Sistine Chapel the cardinals were fraying. The air was stale, thick with the scent of burned ballots and wax. 4 days of voting had yielded nothing but division. Cardinal Parolin's measured diplomacy clashed with Burke's fiery demands for tradition. Tegel's pleas for unity fell flat against Erdo's unyielding conservatism. Zuppi, ever the peacemaker, struggled to bridge the gap. Whispers of the prophecy of Malachi haunted their debates, though few spoke of it openly. One cardinal, his voice trembling, had dared to mention Petrus Romanus during a late-night session, only to be silenced by glares. The prophecy was a specter they couldn't ignore, yet none could face. Sarah's investigation, meanwhile, had taken a dangerous turn. The dossier from the archives, labeled 17B, had pointed her to a deeper secret, one buried in the Vatican's labyrinthine records. Her contact, the nervous young priest, had reluctantly arranged another visit to the archives, warning her that prying further could cost her more than her story. "There are eyes everywhere," he'd muttered, glancing over his shoulder. But Sarah was past caution. The dossier's cryptic notes about a cardinal and a key to Peter's cross had ignited her curiosity, and she needed answers. In the archive's deepest chamber, lit only by flickering lamps, Sarah found it. A leather-bound ledger, its pages brittle and stained with age. The cover bore a strange symbol, a cross pierced by a crescent moon. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing entries in Latin, penned by a 16th-century scribe. The text described a secret society within the church, the Ordo Umbrae, the Order of the Shadow. Formed to protect the church from apocalyptic threats, the order had one mission: to safeguard the prophecy of Malachi and its relics. The ledger hinted at a relic tied to St. Peter himself, hidden beneath the basilica, capable of either averting or unleashing the destruction foretold. One passage chilled her to the bone. "The order watches the conclave, guiding the choice of the vicar. Should Petrus Romanus rise, the shadow decides his fate." Sarah's mind reeled. Was the order still active? Were they manipulating the conclave even now? The ledger mentioned a cardinal who'd joined the order decades ago, his identity veiled, but his influence clear. Cross-referencing with the dossier, Sarah narrowed it to the 5 frontrunners. One of them, Parolin, Erdo, Tegel, Zuppi, or Burke, was more than a candidate. He was a guardian of the prophecy, or its pawn. A sudden noise, a scrape of stone, jerked her from her thoughts. The archive was supposed to be empty, but footsteps echoed in the corridor. Sarah shoved the ledger into her bag, her heart pounding. She extinguished her lamp and crouched behind a shelf, the darkness swallowing her. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a low whisper in Italian. "She's here. Find her." Sarah's breath caught. The shadow from the library, the figure in black, she hadn't shaken them. Whoever they were, they knew she was close to the truth. Outside, the crowd in St. Peter's Square gasped as another plume of black smoke rose. The conclave was stalling, and Rome's unease grew. Street vendors sold amulets against the end of the days, while seismologists reported minor tremors beneath the city. Nothing alarming, but enough to fuel rumors. Sarah slipped out of the archive through a side exit, the ledger heavy in her bag. The prophecy wasn't just a story anymore. It was a conspiracy, woven into the church's heart. And as she vanished into Rome's twisting alleys, she knew the Order of the Shadow was watching, waiting for her next move. The Sistine Chapel was a prison of shadows, its frescoes glowing faintly under flickering candles. 5 days into the conclave, the cardinals sat in weary silence, their scarlet robes heavy with sweat and doubt. Black smoke had risen again that morning, the 6th failure to choose a pope. Outside, Rome churned with rumors of division, of omens, of a prophecy that refused to be ignored. Sarah Harper, hiding in a cramped pension under a false name, pored over the stolen ledger, its tales of the Ordo Umbrae and a relic beneath the basilica haunting her dreams. But to understand the present, she needed the past. The conclave wasn't just a vote, it was a ritual forged in blood and faith, its roots stretching back centuries. In the year 1271, the city of Viterbo was a battlefield. The papacy had been vacant for nearly 3 years. the longest interregnum in history. Cardinals locked in the Palazzo dei Papi bickered and bartered, paralyzed by politics. The townspeople, fed up, took drastic measures. They sealed the cardinals inside, removed the roof, and rationed their food to bread and water. Legend whispered of a darker twist. Poisoned wine slipped to a cardinal who resisted too long. The ordeal birthed the modern conclave, from the Latin cum clove, with a key. The lesson was clear. The Church could not survive without a pope, and the world would force a choice. Centuries later, the rituals crystallized. By the 15th century, cardinals were sequestered in Rome, their ballots burned to signal the outcome. The smoke, once accidental, became a symbol, black for failure, white for triumph. Chemicals, a closely guarded Vatican secret, ensured the colors were unmistakable. The process was sacred, yet brutal. In 1831, a conclave dragged on for 54 days, the cardinal's health failing under the strain. In 1922, whispers of a secret deal with a foreign power tainted the election. Each conclave carried the weight of history, a reminder that choosing a pope was as much about power as piety. Inside the Sistine Chapel, Cardinal Matteo Zuppi felt that weight acutely. At 69, he was no stranger to the Church's burdens, but this conclave was different. As he scribbled a name on his ballot, his thoughts drifted to a question that gnawed at every cardinal: the name of the next pope. Tradition allowed the chosen to take a new name, a symbol of their mission. John, Paul, Benedict, each carried meaning. But one name was forbidden, unspoken: Peter. The first pope, the rock of the Church, was a title too heavy to bear. Zuppi recalled a late-night conversation with an older cardinal years ago who'd whispered of the prophecy of Malachi. "No one takes Peter," the old man had said, his voice trembling. "Not because of pride, but fear. Petrus Romanus is no honor. It's a curse." Zuppi glanced at Cardinal Peter Erdo across the chapel, his Hungarian counterpart's stern face unreadable. Erdo's name alone stirred unease, a coincidence too stark to ignore. Did he know the prophecy's full weight? Did any of them? Zuppi's eyes flicked to the others. Parolin's calculated calm, Tegel's forced optimism, Burke's defiant glare. The Ordo Umbrae, if the legends were true, might be watching them even now, guiding their hands. A childhood tale surfaced in Zuppi's memory. A story of a cardinal who, centuries ago, had tried to take the name Peter, only to die mysteriously before his coronation. The Church called it a heart attack. The streets called it divine wrath. Outside, Sarah pieced together her own fragments of history. The ledger had mentioned the Ordo Umbrae's role in past conclaves, ensuring the right pope was chosen. She found a reference to a 13th century election where a cardinal vanished after questioning the prophecy's relics. His body was never found, but a cryptic carving. Peter's cross, pierced by a crescent moon, was discovered in his chambers. Sarah's fingers traced the same symbol on the ledger's cover. The past wasn't dead. It was alive, woven into the conclave's every vote. As night fell, another tremor rattled Rome, stronger than before. Glasses clinked in cafes, and pilgrims in St. Peter's Square crossed themselves. Sarah's phone buzzed with a new message. "They know you have the ledger. Run." Her heart raced as she glanced out the window, catching a glimpse of a figure in black lingering in the alley below. The conclave was stalled, the prophecy loomed, and Sarah was running out of time. The weight of tradition wasn't just holding the cardinals, it was crushing them all. The seventh day of the conclave dawned under a sky split by streaks of gold and shadow. Rome had grown restless, its streets choked with pilgrims, reporters, and prophets of doom. The tremors, small but persistent, had rattled the city again, toppling a statue in a nearby piazza. Sarah Harper, holed up in a safe house on the outskirts, hadn't slept in days. The stolen ledger lay open on the table, its secrets about the Ordo Umbrae and the relic of Peter's cross burning in her mind. Her phone buzzed with alerts. Another vote today. Will it end? She glanced out the window, her breath catching as a faint plume rose from the Sistine Chapel's chimney. Not black. White. The crowd in St. Peter's Square erupted, a roar of relief and awe sweeping through the thousands gathered below. White smoke, pure, unmistakable, billowed into the sky, signaling the end of the deadlock. A pope had been chosen. Bells tolled across Vatican City, their joyous clamor drowning out the murmurs of fear. Sarah grabbed her binoculars, her heart pounding. The world was about to meet the new vicar of Christ, but the prophecy's shadow loomed larger than ever. Petrus Romanus. Was he standing behind those sealed doors? Inside the Sistine Chapel, the cardinals exhaled as one. The final vote had been agonizing, factions splintering until a name emerged. 2/3 majority, the sacred threshold. The chosen cardinal, pale and trembling, sat in the room of tears, donning the white papal vestments. His peers watched in silence, some with reverence, others with dread. The prophecy had hung over every ballot, unspoken but ever present. When asked his papal name, his answer sent a ripple through the room, a name that carried centuries of weight, one that danced too close to the forbidden. Sarah sprinted toward the square, weaving through the throng as the Vatican's balcony curtains stirred. The cardinal proto-deacon, a gaunt figure in scarlet, stepped forward, his voice booming through speakers, Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam. The crowd roared again, some weeping, others clutching rosaries. Sarah's pulse raced as she pushed closer, her notebook clutched like a lifeline. The proto-deacon continued. Eminentissimum, ec reverendissimum, dominum, dominum. He announced the cardinal's name, then paused, letting the moment hang. Qui sibi nomen imposuit, the name he spoke was Pius XIII. A collective gasp rippled through the square. Pius, a name of strength, of tradition, but it wasn't Peter. Yet whispers spread like wildfire. The new pope was Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the diplomat whose first name, Pietro, meant Peter in Italian. Sarah's blood ran cold. Was this a coincidence, or had the prophecy's hand guided the conclave? The ledger's warnings echoed in her mind. The order watches the conclave, guiding the choice. Had the Ordo Umbrae ensured Parolin's rise? Pius XIII stepped onto the balcony, his white cassock gleaming under the floodlights. At 70, his face was serene yet commanding, his eyes scanning the sea of faces below. He raised his hands in blessing, his voice steady as he spoke in Italian, then English. Brothers and sisters, let us walk together in faith. The crowd cheered, but Sarah caught something in his tone. A fleeting hesitation, a crack in the facade. Did he know the prophecy's weight? Had he chosen Pius to dodge the curse of Peter or to signal something deeper? Rumors swirled in the square. Some claimed Parolin had ties to the Vatican's secret archives, where the prophecy's relics were guarded. Others whispered of a vision he'd had years ago, a dream of Rome in flames. Sarah scribbled furiously, her eyes darting to the edges of the crowd. There, a figure in black, the same shadow that had stalked her since the library. They vanished into the masses, but their presence confirmed her fears. The Ordo Umbrae was watching, and Pius XIII's election was no accident. As the new pope retreated from the balcony, a low rumble shook the ground, stronger than before. The crowd hushed, some crossing themselves. Sarah's phone buzzed with a new message. He is not what he seems. The cross awaits. The prophecy wasn't finished. Pius XIII. Pietro, by birth, stood at its heart, savior or harbinger, no one could say. Sarah tightened her grip on the ledger. The white smoke had brought a pope, but it had also ignited a fuse. The cheers of St. Peter's Square still echoed in Sarah Harper's ears, but the euphoria of Pius X election felt like a fragile mask. The new pope had blessed the crowd from the balcony, his white vestments glowing like a beacon, yet something in his eyes, a flicker of unease, had unsettled her. Rome was no longer just a city. It was a stage, and the prophecy of Petrus Romanus was its script. Sarah slipped through the dispersing crowd, the stolen ledger hidden in her bag, its pages whispering of the Ordo Umbrae and a relic that could save or doom the world. The ground trembled again as she moved, a subtle quake that sent pilgrims whispering prayers. The signs were mounting, and Sarah feared the curtain was rising on the prophecy's final act. Pius X, born Pietro Parolin, had chosen a name that sidestepped the dreaded Peter, but the coincidence of his birth name gnawed at Sarah. She'd spent the night in her safe house, cross-referencing the ledger with every scrap of information she could find. A chilling discovery emerged. Parolin's family traced its roots to a small village near Rome, where a 12th-century church bore a carving of St. Peter with a crescent moon, the same symbol as the Ordo Umbrae. Was it chance, or had the order groomed him for this moment? The ledger hinted at a cardinal who'd joined the order decades ago, and Parolin's career, his rapid rise, his access to the Vatican's secrets, fit too neatly. Rome itself seemed to pulse with unrest. The tremors, once dismissed as minor, were growing stronger, cracking ancient cobblestones in the Forum. Street preachers shouted of the city of 7 hills crumbling, while social media buzzed with grainy videos of strange lights over the Colosseum. Sarah's contact, the nervous priest, had gone silent, his last message warning her to avoid the Vatican. But she couldn't stop. The prophecy's words, "The city of 7 hills will be destroyed," felt like a countdown, and Pius X was its fulcrum. At dawn, Sarah ventured to a hidden chapel near the Tiber, a place Father Lorenzo had mentioned in their first meeting. The chapel was ancient, its walls etched with fading frescoes of St. Peter holding a broken cross. Inside, she found a dusty journal, tucked behind a loose stone, its pages penned by a 17th-century monk. The text spoke of the Ordo Umbrae's obsession with a relic, a fragment of Peter's cross, said to be imbued with divine power. The monk claimed the order had split centuries ago. One faction swore to protect the relic, preserving the church. The other sought to wield it, believing the prophecy's end was God's will. A single line froze Sarah's blood. "The shadow chooses the Pope, and Pietro will bear the cross." Pietro, Parolin's name again. Sarah's hands shook as she photographed the journal. The new pope's blessing had promised unity, but whispers in Rome told a different story. Some cardinals, shaken by the conclave, were said to be questioning Parolin's election, claiming he'd swayed votes with promises tied to the prophecy. A leaked Vatican memo, shared on a dark web forum, hinted at Parolin's private meetings with an unknown group before the conclave. The Ordo Umbrae? Sarah couldn't be sure, but the pieces were aligning too perfectly. As she left the chapel, a figure in black emerged from the shadows, the same pursuer who'd stalked her since the library. This time, they didn't retreat. A low voice, cold and deliberate, called her name. "Miss Harper, you've seen too much." Sarah bolted, her heart pounding as she darted through Rome's twisting alleys. The city felt alive, its ancient stones groaning under the weight of secrets. Another tremor shook the ground, stronger now, toppling a vendor's cart nearby. Screams echoed as dust rose from the streets. Sarah ducked into a crowded piazza, blending with tourists as she caught her breath. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Pope Pius X to hold private audience with select cardinals tonight. The timing felt wrong. Too soon, too secretive. She thought of the journal's warning. Pietro will bear the cross. Was Parolin a puppet of the order or its master? The prophecy's shadow was growing, and Rome was cracking under its weight. Sarah clutched the ledger tighter, knowing she was no longer just chasing a story. She was running toward the end, or racing to stop it. Rome was unraveling. The city of 7 hills quaked under the weight of its own history, each tremor deeper and more violent than the last. Cracks snaked through ancient walls, and the Tiber's waters churned with an unnatural froth. In the streets, protests swelled. Pilgrims clashed with skeptics, their shouts drowned out by preachers proclaiming the end. Above the Colosseum, witnesses swore they saw a blood-red aurora, flickering like a wound in the sky. Sarah Harper ran through the chaos, the stolen ledger and journal tucked inside her jacket, her breath ragged. The prophecy of Petrus Romanus was no longer a whisper, it was a scream, and Rome was its echo. Sarah's safe house was compromised. The figure in black had tracked her, their warning still ringing in her ears. "You've seen too much." She'd fled to a crumbling church on the Aventine Hill, its crypt a temporary refuge. There, under the flicker of a dying bulb, she pieced together the fragments of her investigation. The Ordo Umbrae, the relic of Peter's cross, Pope Pius X's troubling connection to the name Pietro, it all pointed to a truth the Vatican had buried for centuries. But time was running out. The quakes were no coincidence. Seismologists, baffled, reported no tectonic cause. Legends whispered of Rome's fall, and Sarah feared the prophecy was waking. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown source. "Meet me at the Pantheon, midnight. I know the Order's plan. It was a risk, but Sarah had no choice." The sender claimed to be a Vatican insider, someone close to the conclave. She arrived at the Pantheon under a moonless sky, its ancient dome looming like a judge. The plaza was deserted, save for a hooded figure near the fountain. "You're late," the figure said, their voice low and familiar. Sarah's stomach dropped as the hood fell back, revealing her contact, the young priest who'd helped her access the archives. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously. "They're going to let it happen," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "The Ordo Umbrae, they believe the prophecy must be fulfilled. They think Rome's fall will cleanse the church, usher in a new era." Sarah's blood ran cold. The priest explained. A faction within the order, led by a high-ranking cardinal, had manipulated Pius X's election. They saw Parolin, Pietro, as the chosen one, not to save the church but to end it. The relic of Peter's cross, hidden beneath St. Peter's Basilica, was the key. Some in the order wanted to protect it, others aimed to use it, believing its power could trigger the apocalypse foretold. "You trusted me," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Why betray them now?" The priest's eyes glistened. "I didn't know their plan until tonight. They killed Father Lorenzo." Sarah's heart stopped. The old librarian, her first ally, was dead. "They'll kill you too," he added, "unless you stop them." Before Sarah could respond, a sharp crack split the air, a gunshot. The priest crumpled, blood pooling beneath him. Sarah dove behind the fountain, her pulse roaring as footsteps approached. The figure in black emerged, a silenced pistol glinting in their hand. "The ledger," they hissed. "Now!" Sarah bolted, sprinting through the Pantheon's shadows, the journal and ledger clutched to her chest. Another quake hit, stronger than before, toppling statues in the plaza. Screams echoed as Rome trembled, its ancient bones groaning. Sarah's mind raced. The priest's betrayal had exposed the Order's endgame, but it had cost him his life. The relic was real, and the Ordo Umbrae was ready to wield it. Pius X, whether pawn or master, stood at the center. Sarah ducked into an alley, her breath ragged. The city was a tinderbox. Protests, omens, quakes, and the prophecy was its flame. She had to reach the basilica, find the relic, and stop the order before Rome burned. But as she glanced back, the figure in black was still there, a shadow moving closer. The end was near, and Sarah was running out of places to hide. The air in St. Peter's Basilica was thick with incense and dread, the golden glow of candles casting long shadows across the marble. Sarah Harper slipped through a side entrance, her heart pounding as she clutched the ledger and journal, their secrets her only weapon. Rome was a city on the brink. Earthquakes had shattered statues, protests had turned violent, and the sky above burned with an unnatural crimson hue. The prophecy of Petrus Romanus hung like a guillotine, and Sarah knew the relic of Peter's cross, hidden somewhere beneath this sacred ground, was the key to its endgame. The Ordo Umbrae was closing in, and Pius X, the Pope named Pietro, stood at the heart of it all. Sarah's pursuit had led her here, to the basilica's underbelly, guided by the journal's cryptic map. The young priest's dying words echoed in her mind. They'll use the relic to fulfill the prophecy. The Ordo Umbrae's radical faction believed Rome's destruction would birth a new era, and they'd chosen Pius X to light the fuse. But Sarah wasn't alone. The figure in black, her relentless pursuer, had followed, their silenced pistol a constant threat. As she descended a spiral staircase into the Vatican's secret vaults, the ground shook again, a deep rumble that cracked the stone above. Time was running out. The vault was a forgotten crypt, its walls carved with symbols of Peter, a cross, a key, a crescent moon. At its center stood a stone altar, and on it, a reliquary of blackened silver, etched with the same pierced cross from the ledger. Inside, Sarah knew, was the fragment of Peter's cross, a relic said to hold divine power. Footsteps echoed behind her, and she spun to face her pursuer. The figure stepped into the light, their face revealed. Cardinal Raymond Burke, the American firebrand who'd lost the papacy to Paroline. His eyes burned with zeal, the pistol steady in his hand. "You don't understand," Burke said, his voice low. "The Ordo Umbrae is divided. I serve the true order, the ones who protect the church. Paroline's faction, they want the end. They'll use the relic to unleash chaos." Sarah's mind reeled. Burke, a guardian, or another liar? He gestured to the reliquary. "The cross can stop it, but only if we act now." Before Sarah could respond, the crypt's door burst open. Pius X entered, flanked by two hooded figures, Ordo Umbrae enforcers. Paroline's face was serene, but his eyes held a chilling certainty. "Miss Harper," he said, "you've meddled in God's plan." He nodded to the reliquary. "The prophecy demands sacrifice. Rome must fall to rise anew." Sarah's stomach twisted. The Pope wasn't a pawn. He was the architect. The standoff erupted into chaos. Burke fired, grazing one of the enforcers, but the other tackled him, their struggle toppling candles that set the crypt's tapestries ablaze. Sarah lunged for the reliquary, prying it open to reveal a splinter of ancient wood, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. The journal had warned of its power, to avert or hasten the end, but offered no guide. As the quake intensified, stones falling from the ceiling, Sarah made her choice. She smashed the relic against the altar, its light flaring, then fading into dust. The crypt fell silent, the quake subsiding. Paroline's face twisted in rage, but Burke, bloodied, laughed grimly. "You've broken their plan," he said, "or delayed it." The enforcers fled, and Paroline vanished into the shadows, his fate uncertain. Sarah staggered out, the basilica above eerily calm. The city's tremors had stopped, the protests quieted, but an uneasy peace settled over Rome. Days later, Pius X appeared on the balcony, his face haggard but composed. The world watched as he delivered a blessing, his words broadcast globally. "In the shadow of trials, we find light, yet the rock of Peter endures until the final hour." Sarah, watching from a safe distance, froze at his closing phrase, "until the final hour." Was it a promise of hope, or a hint that the prophecy's clock was still ticking? The Ordo Umbrae was wounded, the relic destroyed, but Pyroline had escaped, and Burke's cryptic warning lingered. Sarah boarded a plane back to Chicago, the ledger and journal hidden in her bag. Rome stood, its 7 hills intact, for now. But as the city faded below, she couldn't shake the feeling that the prophecy wasn't defeated, only paused. The shadow of Peter loomed, and the final judgment was still to come. Loved the mystery of Rome and the prophecy? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories, and share this video on social media to spread the intrigue.